Awesome. Well, so Acts chapter 12, we're scrapping that. Brandon Bradley, he was like, it might be a good idea to just kind of veer away from the sermon series for a little bit. It was definitely planned that I did not communicate that. That was definitely not an accident. It was. I will be brutally honest. Today kind of still follows along with the general concept of what do we do now? How do we follow Jesus as the world turns upside down? I wanted to start with a little story, a little bit of a background to me, sort of, more or less. So last summer, I worked at a preschool / elementary school. I worked with kids during a summer program that the school put on. And kids they're a joy to work with. They're a joy. So they're so full of energy and so full of all kinds of stuff, but one of the things that I like most about kids are kids' books. There's something about a children's book that I just really love the concept of, because typically with children's books, what ends up happening is they take these interesting concepts, these good points of life that are important for people to know as adults, and they find a way to convey them to children. And one of the things that my senior minister in my home church down in Houston taught me when I was first becoming a minister, first getting into the Bible college scene, first preaching, first teaching, first youth ministry, all that good stuff. One of the things that he taught me is he put me in the children's ministry, which I was not prepared for, but he put me there anyway, and he said, because here's the thing, here's the reality. If you can teach a third grader theological principles, you can teach anybody. So it's real difficult to teach, third graders some theological principles. But one of the things that I found is that children's books do a great job. They do a fantastic job of teaching kids principles that are important. There's a book that I found while working at that preschool, and I was like, I got to use this bad boy in a sermon. It's a book called, Have You Filled a Bucket Today? The principle of the book is that everybody walks around with a bucket. It's an invisible bucket that you can't see, but everybody has it. When the bucket's full, your heart is full, it's happy, you have joy, you have good self-esteem, and you fill the bucket by being kind. And your bucket is filled by other people being kind to you. Your bucket is empty when people are mean. When they're rude, when they say hurtful things, it empties your bucket. And an empty bucket means that you're sad, that you have lower self-esteem, that you feel bad. Being kind fills your bucket. But guess what? Quick little plot twist, a little spoiler. Being kind to other people also fills your own bucket. Because when you're kind to other people, it helps to make you feel good. So now there's no reason to be mean to other people. Because when you're kind to other people, you feel better about yourself. So why be mean at all? I have a video that I pulled up that I find very interesting, because one of the things that I've noticed is that as we become adults, things they start to change. Which is interesting, because as adults, we're supposed to be getting smarter as we get older. And when it comes to being kind, and as you'll see in this video here in a little bit, when it comes to making friends and just being kind, it's something that children are very good at. I remember when I was working at this preschool, I would go, we were at recess, everybody's running around, they're going down slides, and one of the things that I constantly see happen is kids just going up to other kids where it was their first day and they're saying, hey, do you want to be friends? So why do adults have such a hard time making new friends? I'm not sponsored by Mentos. They definitely don't pay me. This is one of their ads, and it's a fantastic ad where they have children help adults make friends. So let's go ahead and play that video real quick and kind of take a look at how this pans out. But as we watch, I want you to, while you focus on the kids and they're adorable, I want you to see the faces of the adults who aren't a part of the project. I want you to see some of their facial reactions. Pay close attention because you start to see the reality. You start to see adult human nature kind of take its course. And I find it very fascinating. So let's go ahead and play that video.
This is like being a secret agent. Okay. 105. I'm going to help you today.
Okay.
Say hi. Hello. My name is Victoria.
Hi, my name is Victoria.
You're as old as my grandma.
But you look as old as my grandma, actually.
Oh, that's nice. Are you going to die soon?
Are you going to die soon?
Well, I hope you don't.
I hope you don't.
Because you're really nice.
You're really nice.
Hi, mate.
Hi, mate.
What are you doing today?
What are you up to today?
Chris?
Yeah.
Talk to the girl in the stripy shirt.
Hi. Right, can I sit down?
Can I tell you a story?
Can I tell you a story?
Yeah. Once upon a time,
Once upon a time,
there was a goldfish.
there was a goldfish.
He was all alone.
And he was all alone?
The end.
The end.
Nice hair.
I like your hair. Yeah. Do you want to talk about fairies? Fairies? Yeah.
Sit closer. Do you want to come and visit my house?
Do you want to come around my house? Are you sure? Do you want to dance?
No, cuddle.
Please go out and go. Come on. Me and you play any game.
Are we friends now?
Are you friends now?
You are very interesting. Yeah, online psychology, but I
Should we learn each other's numbers?
So you can call each other, maybe.
5.
5.
Yes. 5.
Shall we run? Oh, you're going to stay big and lovely.
They did it.
Do you want us? Yeah?
Would you like a Mentos?
Yes, please.
You like one? Do you want a Mentos?
Okay, thank you.
Mentos? Oh, thank you.
Says not to Mentos.
So there you have it. Did you do what I asked? Did you watch the people who weren't in on it? Did you notice some of their reactions? The look of disgust on their faces, their look of disbelief that anybody would try to just sit down and talk to them, have a conversation, get to know them, try to be their friend. What happened? I have a theory. There's a lot of innocence that comes with being a child. There's a lot of things that you learn the hard way as you get older. You meet people who break your heart. They say mean words to you. They treat you poorly. And over time, your bucket starts to look really empty. When you have a a bucket that's empty. Joy, happiness, self-esteem, trust, it all departs. It all leaves. And it's stuff that typically comes as you get older. You start to realize that the world is a little bit of a rougher place than you had initially thought. Today, like I said, we won't be in the book of Acts. We will, my bad. We will actually be in a completely different portion of the Bible altogether. We're going to be in the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 9. At this point, we are going to see King David, the man after God's own heart. We're going to see what it's like to be kind. So at this point in time, when it comes to King David's life, he's been anointed king, and Saul, King Saul, and his son, Jonathan, have been killed in battle. And for those of you who may not be familiar, Jonathan was a very good, close friend with King David. So they were so close that when Saul, who was Jonathan's dad, was trying to kill David, Jonathan took the side of his friend David rather than the side of his father. When Jonathan should have been the next king of Israel, he followed God's will and sided with David rather than Saul, because he realized that his dad was doing wicked things. David recognizes this, and when Saul dies, and Jonathan gets killed in battle, one of the promises that David makes is that he will take care of Jonathan's family when he's gone. So, fast forward to 2 Samuel chapter 9. We are at the point where Jonathan has already been killed in battle, and King David remembers his promise that he made, and he tries to follow up on his promise. So, 2 Samuel chapter 9, starting in verse 1, it says, David asked, "Is there anyone remaining from the family of Saul I can show kindness to for Jonathan's sake?" There was a servant of Saul's family named Ziba. They summoned him to David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "I am your servant," he replied. So the king asked, "Is there anyone left of Saul's family that I can show the kindness of God to?" Ziba said to the king, "There is still Jonathan's son, who is injured in both feet." The king asked him, "Where is he?" Ziba answered the king, "You'll find him in Lodabar at the house of Machir, the son of Amiel." So King David had him brought from the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lodabar. I don't know if you know much about monarch politics, especially in the ancient world. I don't know if you guys watch those kinds of TV shows, and if you've heard of shows like Reign, or some of those shows where they have medieval times, and they show different kings, different kingdoms, different monarchs. It was very common for new kings to kill off the descendants of the old king. Because those people, they were technically the rightful heirs to the throne. So if a king dies and he has a very young son or a grandson or whatever the case may be, the new king would seek to kill them off. Because if you can do that, you make your reign more legitimate. And so, this is not David's point. He's not trying to harm this person. But Ziba, the servant, doesn't know him. It's very common, and so Ziba is very quick to say he's injured in both feet. He's lame. He can't walk. He's not a threat. He poses no threat. You don't need to worry about him. And David tells him to come. absolutely terrifying. Could you imagine what it would be like to know that it's very common for you to be killed simply because of who you were descended from? And now the person who has every right to do so is now summoning you. That's kind of what's going on. And we see something pretty crazy. You see, David is intending to show kindness, but it's kind of that dramatic irony that you find in English textbooks and things like that, where it's something that David knows, but it's not something that these other characters in the story. And so, reading on, in verse 6, it says, Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David, fell face down, and paid homage to David. David said, Mephibosheth. And he replied, I am your servant. Don't be afraid, David said to him, since I intend to show you kindness, for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all your grandfather Saul's fields, and you will always eat meals at my table. Mephibosheth paid homage and said, what is your servant that you take an interest in a dead dog like me? A couple of key points found in this passage. David invites Mephibosheth to eat at his table. Eating at the king's table is not something that commoners got to do. It was something that was reserved for the family of the king. David is basically saying to Mephibosheth, because of your father, because of Jonathan, because of the kindness that he showed me, I'm going to show you kindness. And now, instead of living in Lo-Debar, instead of being lame, instead of having to fend for yourself, I'm going to take care of you. I will basically adopt you as my son. You will live with me. You will eat with me. I will give you everything that belonged to your grandfather. You'll have all of his fields, all of his servants, everything that you could possibly need. I will give to you. Not because you deserve it, but it's just simply to show the kindness that your father has shown to me. And what is Mephibosheth's reply? Why? Why would you take interest in a dead dog like me? I know we like to carry dogs around in our purses nowadays. I don't carry my dog in my purse. I don't have a purse for you. But dogs were not clean animals. You didn't pet dogs, you didn't touch dogs, you kicked dogs. Technically, you didn't even kick dogs because now you're unclean, you have to go through a long ceremony. Being a dead dog is like a double whammy. Like, being a dog, you're already unclean. Being dead, you're like even more unclean. This is not a very self-esteem filled response. You could say that Mephibosheth's bucket was looking pretty empty. But David, being a man after God's own heart, decides to show kindness. David decides that despite the lineage, I will choose to fill his bucket. Reading on, picking up in verse 9, it says, Then the king summoned Saul's attendant Ziba and said to him, I have given to your master's grandson all that belonged to Saul and his family. You, your sons, and your servants are to work the ground for him. And you are to bring in crops, so your master's grandson will have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, is always to eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. So right here, Mephibosheth is given all of the servants, everything that he'll need, the fields, all that good stuff, the labor. He can't walk, so now he doesn't have to. He has servants who can take care of all that for him. Picking up again in verse 11, Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do all my work the king commands." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table, just like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. All of those living in Ziba's house were Mephibosheth's servants. However, Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. His feet had been injured. Do those verses start to kind of drill the point? How many times is it mentioned that he eats at the king's table? It's important to see that Mephibosheth is no longer a dead dog, but an alive son. He goes from being dead to being alive. He goes from being a dog to being a son. Simply because David chooses to show kindness. There's something about this bucket. You see, this bucket is more than just a bucket. It's a sign for somebody's soul. As Christians, we are called to show kindness to others. We're not simply called just to, share the gospel. That's an important part, but we have to be kind. There are many people walking around with an empty bucket. Empty of joy, happiness, self-esteem, all of the different things that help you wake up. And we should be the ones on the front lines showing kindness. And it's not hard. We just watched a bunch of kids walk adults through friendship and kindness. But oftentimes we get so hesitant about doing it. We get so caught up in what will they think? How will they look at us? What will they say? But that's not what we're called to do. We're not called to worry. We're called to be kind. We're called to follow in David's example of extending God-honoring kindness. Because an empty bucket leads to an empty heart. A full bucket leads to a full heart. It leads to joy, to happiness, to self-esteem, but more importantly, it points back to the love of Christ. So, the next time that you hop on Facebook, you see that person who they posted something, you know what I'm talking about, it's typically pretty political. Typically it disagrees with what you believe. And you always see the comments that are just so quick to put them on blast, to let them know the way it should be. Take a second and think. How can I fill a bucket? When somebody that you know is going through a divorce, the easy thing to do is as Christians, is to point out how divorce is wrong, how God looks down on divorce. But the hard thing is to fill the bucket. Next time you're at a family reunion, your crazy uncle is rambling on about who knows what. How do you fill full bucket leads to a full heart. But an empty bucket makes joy depart. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day that you've given us. Lord, I thank you for the kindness that you shared with us through your Son. Lord, I thank you for David's example of being kind. When he didn't need to, when he didn't have to be kind, when he could have done what he wanted as the king, he chose to remember his promise, and he chose to be kind. Lord, he chose to fill a bucket. God, as we depart from here, I pray that you just open our eyes to see the needs around us, to see the hurt in people's lives. God, to show us the empty buckets that only your love can truly fill. God, I pray that as we depart from here, that we would fill a bucket. It's in your Son's name that I pray.